Okay, hypothetically I'm live. Hypothetically I am live. Make sure. Is this working for everyone? Hopefully. Hopefully, let me look for. There you go. Log in here and make sure I got. Okay, cool. Looks like I am live, so that's good. As we are testing this out. Let me go here. Live chat. Hey, cool. I do see people saying stuff on the chat. That's wonderful. Okay, so howdy y'all. This is going to be August 2024 in review, so depending on how active chat is, it might take a little longer, but we'll see how it goes. With that said, the first paper is up. This is following in the footsteps of Martin Lockley. He is a paleontologist who died last year, but did a ton of stuff on all of the various footprints around northern Arizona and around, northern Arizona, southern Utah, St. George, Glen Canyon area, and it's kind of just remembering everything that he's done and how he's been able to, what he's done has been able to help build more paleo work. So you can see all of these different sites for different fossils that have been found throughout this entire area within the different layers of rock here. And there he is. Here's some of the fossil tracks that he was really able to help start identifying in the area, being able to, share them with the world and publish on them. And here are some of the people he worked with. So it's a really large group that worked with this guy. He did a lot for the site and for the region. And then there's still new sites being found there, largely based on a lot of the geology that he had done. So this is actually a tridontid bed, right? Sorry, mammal and close to mammal group names are poor for me. Regardless, it's a new bone bed that they found just right above the water in Glen Canyon. So, depending on where the water is, it's higher or lower, it's going to end up underwater. So that's not necessarily as ideal as you might expect, but it's really nice to have this so that we can actually do some more of the work and, just kind of remember his legacy because he did so much for the region. Okay, next one is from Britt et al. This one's actually really interesting because the Lagerstadt is in the Nugget Sandstone, and they've had some Society of Paleontology abstracts about some of the stuff there. There's hypothetically a new trypanosaur, and then they talk about potentially a new coelophysoid being found nearby. But these are just the tracks, but it's a long layer of tracks, and the Saints and Sinners bone bed is where the bones are. But really importantly, it helps to be like, hey, yeah, this might be what left all of these tracks. So hopefully we're going to get a lot more as people are starting to publish on parts of this bone bed, start seeing a lot more publications on what's happening here. I say that largely because I'm not able to. Okay, sorry, I'm messing with stuff to try and make sure everything is working. Anyway, sorry, they're getting the bone bed there. They're starting to actually publish on it, and hopefully we'll see that. Because I love trypanosaurs. I'd love to see that published on, but we'll see how that goes, right? Because A, is it a new one? B, is it not a new one? What else is there? Lots of neat stuff. Okay, can I not? Try and get the next one going. Yeah, I can do that. It's fine. Sorry, I'm trying to open up the next one now, because some of these are just saving automatically as PDFs, so just taking an extra moment. So yeah, this is more about conservation. So this is a large track site in Texas. So obviously we're starting with tracks as the main start of this video. But this is the Glen Rose Formation. It's Cretaceous, again, from Texas. And there's a lot of different tracks that are out there. However, really importantly, some of these are pretty easy to access, which means people hang out around them and there's streams and stuff. So what they did is they did photogrammetry to record essentially the preservation of all the tracks in a 3D model. And they, talk about it a little bit more. As some of this stream dried up over the last year, they were able to look at them in even better detail. But really importantly, what they did is they used that scan and they're essentially going, great, now we can actually go back in the future and rescan everything and see how much it's changing, which is really, really nice to have, because if you're able to do that, you're able to understand what kind of erosion threats there are to different fossils, and especially fossil tracks. And from that, you're able to go, great, now we can actually work at conserving these in other places. And like, I know of a track site that's nearby water, and so this is good to see it starting to happen so that people can start to conserve these tracks and be able to actually preserve them long term. Even if it is as a 3D model, preserving them long term. So yeah, that's that one. Go. So this one is actually much more recent, but also in Texas. This is near Hall's Cave in Texas. And the person who did this actually had the winning Romer talk at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. So go him. What is, I believe is the author, yeah. But he essentially was looking at these relatively recent fossils over the last maybe 20,000 years or so, maybe a little bit less, and trying to identify what lizards essentially fell into this cave, so that then he can compare it to the modern day diversity of lizards in the region. And so what you're seeing is, okay, yeah, it was cooler back then, so there was some differences. However, also really importantly, we can look at how that has changed over just the last few hundred to thousands of years as humans started to move into the area, and especially as European settlers started to move into the area, bringing in cattle and grazing and just changing the entire regime of the prairie. So this talk was great. I'm really excited for that. Okay, make sure I'm getting signed into that. I can actually access this one. There we go. Also relatively recent, we have cave lions. They're big. However, really importantly, they actually got smaller over time. And so what you see is essentially an example of that there. And these top three are males, the bottom two are females. However, the top ones are the older ones. And I mean that in time, not necessarily the individual's age. So what you're seeing is here is this general trend towards getting smaller, which suggests there was some sort of environmental issue. They do also suggest that potentially bears did compete with them, could have been something. However, there's also evidence of, there's this one, but I believe this is essentially an artistic reconstruction of, there we go, this one, where you have a young bear that was probably at least had an attempted predation on it by a cave lion. So there's a lot of different interactions that are happening with the different faunas here, and the cave lions for a long time were just the apex predators, but then the bear started to move in, as well as different canids starting to move in. So that potentially caused the kind of stress on the environment that caused them to start getting smaller as we got closer to today. Do I have full access to this? I do not. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick Google search. There we go. So this is basically Neolacaphrium. It's a Sanu, South American native ungulate, which is this really weird group of herbivorous ungulates that come from South America, shockingly. But we don't know a lot about their early evolution, but at least now we're starting to get some better fossils of them. There's a new fossil that comes from Uruguay that actually has more of it preserved, and they're able to look at the femur. And the femur is really good for understanding how big it could have gotten, because you can do stuff with like the diameter of the femur and say, okay, well, its mass would have been this much. And so they estimate anywhere from like 29 to 16 kilograms, with an error bar of about 10 kilograms, but most of the numbers they're finding are in the high 20 kilograms. So it probably weighed around 60 pounds. So it would have been a relatively small deer-like animal, at least as far as how it probably lived. It likely would have just been kind of browsing around and, you know, doing that kind of thing. Maybe even goat-like. Okay, and the next one. This is another one that I don't have full access to right now. I'm sure I saved a PDF anywhere. Anyway, but it's Campanian fragilissimus, which is this new sauropod. Really importantly, it is very pneumatized, which means there's a lot of air sacs running all through it. It also comes from South America, and as a Hypacrosaurid, it's this kind of weird group of, the most known one is Angiosaurus. Where we're just going to go to the Wikipedia because they have the figures there. And unfortunately, that's not, I want one with the face. There we go. We have this really wide face for browsing through different yeah. Oh, that's my mother saying stuff. Hi, Mom. Um, so this is Angiosperm. It has this really wide mouth. The new one, Campinian, is from the late Cretaceous of, I believe, late Cretaceous. Cenomanian is, yeah, it's kind of in the middle of that. Sorry, my exact stages on Cretaceous aren't perfectly memorized. However, it's really close to a lot of these early Hypacrosaurids, and that means the Hypacrosaurids probably got their start in South America, as you might be able to have picked up from Nigerosaurus. It didn't come from South America, it came from Niger and Africa. So it really helps to suggest that, yeah, they started in South America and then were able to diversify into Africa, and even some of them made it into Europe. So really interesting to find this kind of thing so that we can really start understanding a little bit better about how this group evolved. Okay, I can dump that. There we go. Staying in South America, we have these Iguanodontian dinosaurs, and it's kind of known that, hey, there's some ornithopods, which are the things that are kind of like Hadrosaurs or Iguanodon, you know. They're the very generic herbivore dinosaurs. Unfortunately for the South American ones, they're somewhat partial, so we haven't been able to get really solid evidence on what necessarily they were doing. And there's new specimens from the Atacama Desert in Chile, but they're not that complete. Scroll down. So here's where they're working in. And there should be some photos of the fossils here. There you go. There's a reason it says Iguanodontia, some sort of genus, some sort of species. It's not super complete. However, we can at least use these fossils to very clearly say that, yeah, it is an Iguanodontian. So the Iguanodontians definitely got to South America before the breakup of Pangaea, and then, you know, did pretty well, probably surviving up until the very latest Cretaceous, although at that time we also start getting some migration of certain hadrosaurs into South America. So there's this kind of very late faunal turnover at the very latest part of the Cretaceous. And here you can see this is kind of where these Iguanodontians are distributed throughout the southern continents during the Cretaceous. So you can see, yeah, they're in South America and Africa, as well as a few being out towards Australia and potentially even parts of Antarctica. This area here is kind of on the very southern margin of Australia, so it makes sense that they probably would have been going straight into Antarctica as well. Now, I talk about the Iguanodontians and the hadrosaurs. There's also the non-hadrosaurid hadrosauroids. Southeastern Gondwana is Australia now. Yes, that is correct. To Shira Lane. Yeah, that's correct. That would be Australia there. So yeah, the non-hadrosaurid hadrosauroids mean essentially you have this branch that's largely Iguanodontians over here, and then you start getting closer to hadrosaurs, but before you get to true hadrosaurids, you have this other collection of things that we're starting to find more of. I think eventually they'll be named as a proper group. They're just not there yet. However, here you go. It's Qingjiangsaurus Qingshengai, and it's partially complete. Jump all the way down to here. You have some of the lower jaw of it. These fossilize really well. Mandibles, dentary bones are very sturdy, so they fossilize really nicely. It's part of the reason we have so many of them. And since these things are eating so many plants, it means the variation in that lower jaw can be pretty significant between different taxa. So it's really useful for identifying what their diversity actually was. In addition, it actually helps to suggest that there was this really good dispersal route for different dinosaurs throughout the late Cretaceous of Asia. And that's because this is found to be really closely related to Plesiohadros, which is from Mongolia, but this is found all the way in like the most southern part of China. So it's really helping to suggest that, yeah, these things weren't necessarily just very slowly migrating across Asia. Instead, they were pretty rapidly doing so. So that's really cool to see. Again, we're just getting better understanding of kind of how these things are moving along and getting to where they ended up. This one is also really cool. This is going into true hadrosaurids, but it's Hypacrosaurus, and there's two bone beds, and they don't, I think, actually have any photos of them. but they're showing where they are. The bone beds are in the Old Man and Two Medicine formations, which are essentially the same formation, but one's north of the border in Canada and the other one is south of the border in Montana. It's the same rocks. However, really importantly, there's two of these bone beds. One of them has a bunch of individuals that are right around 3 or 4 years old, and the other one has a bunch of individuals that are over 7 or 8, but vary in their age. So what that's suggesting is that at least early on in Hypacrosaurus, the young would kind of all hang out until they were large enough to join these larger herds, which is really exciting to see. We're starting to really understand kind of, okay, yes, they probably were cared for in the nests, but eventually it was like, all right, well, we're not going to keep herding. Have fun. Good luck. And, they'd move on and let the various, let nature take its course for some of them and let some of them grow up to adulthood, which is neat. We're starting to really understand a lot more of that. Nature. This one is also really cool, and I don't know how great I don't remember exactly how great the figures are, but they did a bunch of microwear analysis on ornithopod teeth. So this is everything from hadrosaurs to really small things like Triasaurus, which may have been up to 9 feet long, so about 3 meters if it was a really large one. So what they're doing is essentially looking at this microwear to see, okay, well, how much were they eating? Also looking at some of these different lines that you can see inside the teeth here, these almost vertical lines. And the reason that they're doing that is so, I need to pop the chat back open. The reason they're doing that is that can give you some indication of how quickly they were replacing their teeth. And so when they're replacing their teeth really fast, that means they're probably eating something really tough, which means if you're looking at the microwear, the little dents and scratches on the surface, those should correlate. So what you're ending up getting essentially is that, yeah, that does correlate. And also some of these larger ornithopods were actually going through teeth really rapidly, in part because they were going through so much of their teeth. Some of the largest ones would grind away about 3,360 cubic centimeters of tooth per day. Or was that millimeters? Gosh, now I'm doubting if I correctly adjusted the amount. Millimeters. Sorry, I forgot to move a decimal point. So 336 cubic centimeters, which is still a lot of volume, right? Like, that is a massive amount of tooth to just be wearing away every single day. That also means that because they're wearing it away, they need to more rapidly replace their teeth, and it really suggests that a lot of these early ornithopods, so when you're going here, a lot of these earlier ornithopods were kind of just generalist browsers, eating a lot of varied plants that were largely soft, whereas the larger ones were like just eating as much as they could. Anything and everything that they could get to, they would eat it, no matter how tough it was. And that makes sense. We have some evidence in Edmontosaurus that it was potentially even eating like wood. As for people in the chat who are saying, who measures teeth in cubic millimeters, the scientists do, because you have to think they're wearing into the teeth as well. And hadrosaurs and a lot of other ornithopods had these dental batteries whereas we chew in the surface is here for the occlusional surface, we grind stuff like this. They kind of came in at an angle, and so would shear through here. So it's pushing down into the teeth as these jaws are working against one another. Hi, cat. I know, you're a wonderful cat. So that's kind of why they're doing that, is because you're trying to get the absolute amount of tooth that is being worn into, so you can try to understand how much of it is actually being removed. And you can really see this on Moclodon here, where you can see where the flat surface is, where that's grinding against the other set of teeth. Greetings from Peru. Howdy. Hey all. Okay. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well. As for other things that are eating or otherwise interacting with plants, this one is actually looking at a modern rainforest, but importantly looking at things like ferns, which would have been much more common in the geologic record with a lot of these animals. But they're looking at how arthropods interacted with them, which is really interesting because when you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, well, bugs eat plants. Yeah, but there's a lot of different ways that bugs do use plants. So they found 19 different types of damage. This is another one that I unfortunately don't have all of the access to, but I thought it was really interesting just because understanding how insects evolved is good and how plants evolved in coinciding with that. They found 19 types of damage, 14 of which were from the arthropods, and about 25% of that fern-arthropod interaction is actually being feeding. The rest of it is things like, oh, hey, they're drilling into it to lay eggs or to make a nest. So there's a lot of different biases there. And also potentially that's not really what we're seeing in the fossil record. So potentially there's a biases against these plants that are being fed upon, which might make sense because there's less of them to be preserved, but also maybe the plants that did get fed upon were able to release some chemicals that then led to lower rates of feeding upon. So they just didn't necessarily die as quickly and get shoved out into the water where they could get fossilized. There's a lot of questions. I'm really excited to see this applied more to the fossil record. Cool. Good to see everyone popping into the chat. I appreciate it. Come on, load. There we go. This one's also about insects, but this time dermestid beetles. Dermestids are, if you ever go to a museum or something, and you see a modern skeleton of something, this is how they got that, essentially. They would use dermestid beetles to eat the flesh off of it. So what they did is they looked at some of these fossils that are coming from northern Mexico, and there's a lot of these different types of interactions. So there's these little furrows and stuff that are suggesting that, oh yeah, the insects were eating and then they just kind of hit the bone and just kind of glanced off the surface and kept eating. However, later on, it seems like there's some that are, those are still more of those ones. There's some that are a little bit deeper and shorter. And what that suggests is essentially these insects were still feeding on the carcass, but they also, if you're an insect and you're just kind of eating whatever's in front of you and you run into another insect, another larva, you're going to eat it. But that also means you don't want to be eaten. So seemingly they made these little essentially burrows to just sit inside. And so they'd sit inside there. That way they also wouldn't just eat one another. So really interesting to see this. It also means the bodies were probably at the surface for quite a good amount of time, at least a month or so, if not a little bit longer. And some of the bones are more worn. You can see around some of these more weathered margins of the bone. It means it was probably out for a few years even and then got buried. So really interesting to see as we're getting more taphonomy done to really understand kind of how these things are actually happening. And you can see some of these even deeper burrows here. Cool. And then we have Monte San Giorgio in, I believe it's southern Switzerland, right? Yeah, Switzerland. So this is really cool because it's one of the only places in the Triassic that preserves a lot of insects. Oh gosh, I'm a little behind. Is your question a little, I don't know. What do you think based on your experience? Oh, that's a good question. Before I get into this paper, someone in the chat asked, do I consider myself a science communicator or a science journalist, or none of them? I would say science communicator because I'm also doing research, whereas like I have a friend who's a journalist and he has much different standards for actually doing journalism as far as the way you publish a story and stuff. It's similar to publishing a scientific article, but I am just communicating what the science is. I'm not necessarily doing proper, thorough journalism here. So I think I'm providing a valuable service, but I would not call myself a journalist. Anyway, sorry, back to the paper. Middle Triassic, this is just after the Permian Triassic extinction, the only mass extinction to significantly affect insects. So this is really nice to have. We can see all kinds of things here, right? I am not great at the different group names in insects, so I'm doing my best at trying to tell you what some of these things are, but you do find really interesting things like some of these early dipterans, which are essentially a lot of the winged insects. So that's things like fruit flies and even more things, but also mosquitoes. So really you can blame the Swiss for mosquitoes because those are our earliest fossils of them. But really importantly, again, this is right after that extinction that really wiped out a lot of the insects and the only mass extinction to seriously affect them. And so when we're looking at this, it's really useful because it's like, hey, look, we actually finally have some answers for how these groups started to diversify afterwards and how we started to really start approaching some of our more modern insect faunas. And you can see in this one, this one, this is kind of your phylogenetic tree of these different insects that are showing up here, as well as many of the different locations where they have been fossilized at different times throughout the Triassic. But again, this is one of the really great places for it because there's a lot of them, as opposed to some of these ones have some different groups, but not necessarily as many of the modern groups. Okay, Neocalamites, sorry, Neocalamites. Hopefully there's a good figure of it here, but what I can do is I can go, nope. I mean, the mosquitoes probably did transport diseases like they do today. So going into here, these are horsetail plants. In this next paper, and this is still Triassic of Europe actually, but it's these little like almost reed-like structures. Here's some other ones. I'm not sure if they are edible. Seemingly they are for some people, so interesting. But they like to live around water. They have these very noticeable columns with various leaves or leaf-like structures coming off of them. This one is a new one coming from Germany, and it's really interesting because it's from the Middle Triassic. It's a new species, Neocalamites vanderbergii, which it's nice to show that, hey, there's a new species, and it was probably doing something a little bit different than the other horsetails that we know of. Unfortunately, I can really only say that much. They don't go that much into detail about it, but hopefully we'll be able to get some understanding of the paleo environment as more people do research on these fossils, but also even modern horsetails, because they are still around. They're just a lot more rare. Okay. Next one. Oh, do I need to sign into this one? I do need to sign into this one. Give me one moment, y'all. This next one, though, is a paper on bite marks on Hyperadapodon, which is this rhynchosaur. Let me get to why. There we go. And then I can go to online access for the journal and search for the paper. And there we go. There you go, full article. Wonderful. So now I have all the figures and everything. So yeah, this one is from India. Hyperadapodon is a rhynchosaur, which I believe they have a figure of something like one here. Nope, not that I see right now. Those tabs. Hyperadapodon. This is the Iguanodontian one, maybe? I don't know. But essentially it's an archosauriform, so closely related to crocodilians and dinosaurs, but branching off a little earlier. Really white head, little beak, not super huge, as you can see in this reconstruction, not massive. It's kind of a snack for whatever was around during the Triassic. These ones also help to show that because there's different bite marks on them, and some of these bite marks actually occur on the head and face of it, and don't necessarily show biting through, but more manipulation. So probably potentially some level of predator-prey interaction as opposed to just scavenging, where it's biting on this in order to actually handle it. Next, that's what's happening here. The main point is, as I'm getting here, I'm make sure I'm getting the right things. I'm also trying to check chat. Let me get to the end of this one, and then I'll check chat, because that looks like a more involved question. This is one that's really great because it essentially gives you what the trophic system was likely like, where phytosaurs would have definitely been like the top predators, where they potentially even would have eaten some of the terrestrial pseudosuchians, which are more related to crocodilians, would have looked like a crocodile but on land. But you know, they're eating everything. The metoposaurs also would have been kind of up there. But at least on land, it seems like some of these large dinosaur forms and some of these postosuchids probably would have been eating one another at different times. So you're starting to really start building out the kind of ecosystem that this would have been. Okay, chat. Upstate New York. And use on the Homotherium mummy cub. The mummy cub is really interesting, and that will be in a later one. I am trying to catch up on all my month in reviews, so just stay tuned. It's really neat. I don't think it's going to be able to be cloned just because of the saber-toothed cats are much further apart as far as evolutionary sense from any modern cat than any modern cat is to one another. So it'd be kind of like going, yeah, we can use a puma and clone it using, let's say, a tiger or something. And that's really not that practical because they are separated by millions of years of evolution. It would be even harder to do that with Homotherium, unfortunately. Okay. Here we go. Unfortunately, do I have a... I'm trying to see. There we go. So this one is a virtual skeleton and then essentially body mass estimates for Sinosaurus, which would have been a whole lot like Dilophosaurus, but comes from China. They're most often paired together. Okay, just checking what everyone's saying. So what they were essentially able to do is go, okay, yeah, so probably would have been in the realm of about 850 kilograms, so about 1,900 pounds, so just a little under a ton. And with natural variation among species, it probably could have weighed about a ton, about 2,000 pounds. It was probably pretty good with these long cursorial legs of running down prey, but also really importantly, there are some theropods that occur later in the Jurassic that had shorter arms and larger heads, whereas here you still see relatively large arms and a relatively small head, meaning whatever it was capturing probably needed to be processed and manipulated with the hands more, and we start to see that kind of change as time goes on throughout the Jurassic. Okay, people are chatting. Go. This is kind of going a little bit back towards the beginning. The beginning where I was talking about what Martin Lockley did for a lot of the southern Utah, northern Arizona paleontology. But importantly, this is from the Kayenta Formation of Utah. And this part of it, I believe, is actually in Arches National Park. And it's the first dinosaur fossil coming from Arches. Now, here you go. You have your various areas here. This is kind of where it was found in. However, as you get down, it's not super complete. It's enough to say it was a theropod. And of the theropods we know from the Kayenta Formation, Dilophosaurus is the best known. So likely that. Size also potentially helps that. Although there are some other fossils that are still being worked on. Again, you have little parts of some of these feet, where there's a few different specimens now where you have different foot bones. But again, we're starting to find more stuff out here in Arches, which is not normally the case. Normally, Arches has been very fossil depauperate, and there's plenty of reasons that could have been, but whatever the case is, we're finally starting to find stuff there. So it's really important for starting to get out to some of these places where we haven't found fossils and just go look again, go double check. You might find something. Okay, what made non-avian theropods so heavy, right? Yeah. What made the non-avian, question from the chat. What made non-avian theropods so heavy compared to birds and crocodilians of comparable height and length? They weren't necessarily that heavy. They were still very pneumaticized. And actually, I believe that the, my understanding is that the Pseudotsuchians and land-based crocs would have actually been heavier. However, they also had 4 limbs to support their weight, so I'm not exactly sure. I know that a lot of the old estimates for theropod masses are probably pushing it a little too far because we didn't really have a good understanding that basically all theropods likely had this extensive air sac system, the way you see in modern birds, where when birds breathe in, they take it into their lungs. They also can store some of that in air sacs. They breathe out what's in their lungs, go put that air from the air sacs back into their lungs, can pull more air in to those air sacs, and then push out what's in their lungs. And so they're basically always having oxygen in their lungs, as opposed to us when we breathe out. You start to get lightheaded really quickly because there's no oxygen in your lungs. So I think there's needs to be a lot more. There need to be better assessments for massive theropod dinosaurs, in my opinion, because also a lot of it, like I was talking about earlier with the South American native ungulate, is based on like femur size, and that's great when we have all of these living animals that are four-legged that we can compare with. Theropods were doing something different because they're walking only on their back legs, so it's really hard to say exactly what those masses are. I know, Kat, you really want to come up here. Okay, I'm going to get through the next paper, and then I will get back to comments in the chat, just to keep it moving along. So this is mammal growth patterns, clearly. But small ones, at least in the modern day, grow really fast and reach maturity super early. And you can look at the kind of cementum annuli in the teeth, which are these little yearly lines that develop in the teeth. Really useful for mammals because they keep their teeth all the time. What, cat? Hop up. That way you can be at least kind of, hopefully, quieter. Sorry, we have some goofy cats. So yeah, this is the cementochronology. That's that kind of thing that I was talking about with the annulum cementi annuli. I don't remember the exact term, but cementum annuli, yeah. They essentially look at this in both modern mammals and in fossil mammals, and what they're able to show is, yeah, these early small mammals and things related to mammals grew slower and reached maturity later, and also by extension would have lived longer. So it's this really interesting trend that we are seeing throughout the Mesozoic, where instead of just having basically very early adoption of modern mammal growth rates, you instead are ending up with faster or slower growth rates but longer lifespans. And so potentially, you know, as mammals, at least in the Jurassic, seem to have remained fairly small, some of them got larger in the Cretaceous. It seems like those mammals really went through a significant lifestyle change and evolved a different lifestyle in order to reach maturity faster and develop faster. Okay. Ah, cat, you're knocking over the microphone. Cat. Here, go up on the tree. We set a cat tree up and out of the way. There you go. Just be content up there. You can look down on us. It's a very pretentious cat. It would look down on us. Okay, next one is from the Jurassic, and these are ovaries from a plant. So this is essentially just where the seeds develop. And they have a couple of nice figures in here. Here's the fossil. It's really hard to see, but they were able to use some good imaging techniques to really get a sense of it. And also, plant people know what they're talking about more than I do. However, this is kind of what you're getting, where, you know, you have the overall shape of it, and you're starting to get these seed pods growing here on the side. This adds to the overall diversity of fossil plants that we know of that are angiosperms. And angiosperms are basically all fruiting plants. So, really, cat, you're going to shake the entire desk? Sorry, it's trying to sharpen its claws. So, the angiosperms are all fruiting plants. So, if you think it has a fruit, apples, that's a fruiting plant. It produces a fruit. Cottonwood trees, grasses, those are all angiosperms. Whereas gymnosperms are things more like pine trees that produce cones, and that's how they are able to reproduce. Here we have a bunch of these early angiosperms, and we can see they're already developing a lot of variation in how they're actually producing different seeds and fruit types. So in this case, this new one is Xenofructus dabuensis. So it's a new one, it's Middle Jurassic of China, and it's really cool to start finding more of these. I think we're getting more and more evidence that angiosperms date back even further than we had thought, which is really cool, because when we're thinking about angiosperms, a lot of the genetic data that's been found suggests that they're about they diversified really in the Cretaceous. However, we're slowly finding more of them. So what it seems like may have actually happened is the angiosperms probably got started in the early Jurassic, maybe the late Triassic. I'm still a fan of that, but we need evidence for it. And started to diversify in the Jurassic. However, then at the end of the Jurassic, as climates changed and such, Cat, you are getting very in the way. I am sorry. I know. I'm going to set you on the ground. But you're trying to knock over the entire computer screen, so I think that's fair. Anyway, sorry. So these plants seemingly just started to diversify a lot more in the Jurassic, and then at the end of the Jurassic probably went through a small extinction event, and then essentially the modern diversity of them bloomed out of that. Is kind of what I would imagine. Okay, chat went down for a minute. Nice fossils, cool. Cambrian fossils are fun. I don't think there's not enough evidence of other theropods in Cretaceous North America before the impact. I'm pretty sure T-Rex was the only megatheropod there, and that seems to be a trend that we're finding along a lot of late Cretaceous ecosystems. I am talking with people about trying to test that though, so stay tuned for, maybe a few years, because it's a large project. Okay, so the next one is still hanging out with plants though, and this is Shalinia, and it's actually kind of that transition between the cones and some of these seeds. So you can see kind of you're getting these various cones that are being produced, but they're not necessarily identical in structure to cones of any known conifer trees, so essentially pines or spruce trees. So we're starting to really get good evidence that there's a lot of these changes happening. So that's really nice to see. Again, plant people know better than I do. I am not a plant person, but we're starting to really just get solid evidence on how the angiosperms really started to evolve. You can also look at this figure here, where it's talking about some of these different structures here. And so you have the bract, which is this kind of outer covering, and it's starting to wrap around the seed, which is potentially essentially how the fruit evolved, where you have this bract part of this outside part of it starting to spread around and get around the seed in order to protect it, and then that expanded into the fleshy part of the fruit that we now know today. Make sure I'm not skipping one. Yep, not skipping one. Okay. Okay, and so we're on Luchabang Xingji, which is an interesting pterosaur. And the thing is, it is a chimera where it's essentially two fossils stapled together. Really importantly, though, the skull does have some unique traits that do say, yeah, it's two different fossil animals stapled together, but really importantly, it is still valid. There is still a unique species in there. Let's click on some of these figures, make them bigger. So you can look at some of the where it's joined together, where you can see the rostrum here and whatnot. This is essentially what was recovered, because unfortunately this fossil got heavily damaged by floods, which is why this one is in a very poor state. And that's part of the reason there were some questions about it, because you can go look through and go, okay, well, yeah, there's definitely some stuff that was added on, but at least some parts of it are still pretty nice. And fortunately, at least the tip of the snout is still very well preserved, but it's an issue that can happen at a lot of various museums where, yeah, random freak accidents can just destroy fossils to some degree. But it is still valid. So Luchabang, if it was ever your favorite pterosaur, and the fact that they went, hey, no, it's not valid anymore, made you sad, it is still valid. It's valid in a hi cat. It got returned. It's just, this is not the entire fossil of it. This is the current status of the fossil, and hopefully we'll find some more to really get a better understanding. Okay. Okay. Checking chat again. Okay. So this is the osteohistology of two of the early Eanthornines, or the opposite birds, meaning that essentially you have like the lineage leads to modern birds here, and this is a separate branch that just broke off earlier. But in most ways, they are basically just birds. And I mean that in like 90% of ways, they are just birds. So, cutting open the bones, here's the specimens, here's whether they were looking at them more specifically, and then cutting open the bones, seeing kind of how they would have grown. What they found is there's actually similarities, at least in one of these birds, to what we see in modern precocial birds, which means essentially when they hatch, they're able to just immediately go out. Think of the difference between like a baby robin and a baby chicken. The baby chicken is able to pop out of its egg and start running around pretty quick, whereas the baby robin is stuck in its nest for a while. So that's kind of what you're seeing as the differences there. This means that at least a lot of these early birds were likely to move around pretty quickly after hatching, and some of them might even have just been essentially already capable of flight. Like, oh yeah, you hatched and now you can just take off and go. Which, if you're thinking about potentially the histories of flight, evolutionary histories of flight, it may have evolved as a predator evasion tactic, where it's like, yeah, if you take off into the air, whatever's running on the ground can't catch you as easily. So that would make some sense. Yeah, there we go. And now we're on Asteriornis, which is close to both the chickens and the ducks, which are some of the oldest groups of birds, which is wild. Chickens and ducks, or at least their lineages, are older than Tyrannosaurus rex. Not saying it would have been exactly like a chicken or exactly like a duck, but somewhere in between. Really interestingly, though, this one is from the latest Cretaceous, has a lot of great preserved skull material, but also some skull material that's not as well preserved, which is really unfortunate. There's one figure in here I really wanted to point at, which is, I believe, this one. Here's one of these other ones. Oh, there we go. So this is the retroarticular process on the lower jaw, and it's really important for understanding some of these different groups of birds, especially Gyoancerae is the more duck-like ones, and then the more chicken-like ones. And maybe Asteriornis is in here. It's hard to know because we don't actually have that specific part of the jaw preserved. It'd be really nice if we did, because that way we could say more confidently if it was closer to ducks or closer to chickens. But right now we just don't really know. Checking comments. Okay. Oh goodness, someone says hi from Australia and that it's 5 a.m. Get some rest, dude. Okay. Then I'm going to keep going. That's what I did there. Okay, full article. Wonderful. So, also with birds, this is the London clay, and Gerald Meyer is working with some private collector who went to the London clay very regularly and just had an eye for bird fossils, and so has over the last few years described like a dozen or 24 species of new fossil birds from the Eocene, so about 10 million years after the impact that killed the dinosaurs. And these are all starting to get put into collections, which is really, really great to see. So you have these different ones. There's, scroll down too far on my other part. So there's Paraortigoides argillae and Walton Ornyx bumpanipodides, which I know, those are mouthfuls. So here's the first one, Paraortigoides, which there's enough bones there to go, oh, hey, that's really cool. And also it seems like it's an early galliform, meaning it's closer to chickens again. And in fact, both of these seem pretty close to chickens. Walton Oryx, though, where's the other one? Do you have, there we go. This one here, though, was found to actually be closer to Bumpanipodius, which is from Mongolia. So it seems like there is a really widespread galliform fauna throughout Eurasia, and potentially some good migration routes again between Central Asia and, again, this is from London, this is Western Europe. So it seems like they are pretty widespread across that area. What's the line between bird and dinosaur, says someone in the chat. That's a great question. I'm I'm not a bird expert, so I am not going to start on that, simply because I know some people are going to disagree. There's a lot of variation. Some people say it's closer to Archaeopteryx. Some people say it's Pygostylia, essentially when they get the short little tails with the big fan of feathers. There's a lot of debate about it. Okay. Cool. Okay, great. Going to keep moving on. We're jumping back into plants real quick. So this is for the mallow family, right? Mallow. So this means things like cotton even is a mallow plant. Hibiscus as well. But essentially what it's showing is that there are some fossils from Argentina, which help to show that, hey, yeah, these were around just after the impact that killed off the dinosaurs. And that means there was probably dispersal to South America for this group during the Cretaceous, but they were probably pretty limited in their number. Essentially, they weren't super numerous, because we have some older fossils of things related to them. What this means is essentially they just hung out, and then after that impact and a lot of the other trees died, they were able to just explode in diversity and start showing up more often. Okay. I see people are arguing about Tyrannosaurus rex in the chat, and I am not going to comment because Tyrannosaurus rex is neat and all of the other theropods are neat as well. So this one is the late Paleocene, early Eocene. So this is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. So you got to think as, sorry, I'm trying to move so the camera makes sense. So Greenland was attached to Europe and started to split away, and that opened up a lot of the crust, causing a lot of volcanism and lava and such. That raised temperatures globally. This is looking at a specific area in the early Mediterranean, where essentially they're looking at carbon cycles and temperatures. And so what you're ending up with is these periods where you have very increased levels of heat. And those would last for about 200,000 years, and then they'd start to cool off again over the course of about 24 to 27,000 years. What's really important, though, is throughout the entire 6 million year or so period, it's constantly getting warmer and drier regardless. So there's the general trend towards warmer and drier with these very punctuated periods of even more intense drying. So hopefully we don't necessarily experience quite the same thing with modern climate, but it's something to be aware of, that this it's not always just constant warming or constant cooling. It can vary periodically throughout a general trend. Okay, Paleocene forests. Speaking of the Paleocene, it was warmer. There were forests in Antarctica. This one's looking at a lot of these trees coming off of Seymour Island here, which is one of the better places for finding fossils in Antarctica because it's not covered in, ice that's 800 feet thick, if not more. But here we are, we're getting into these fossil woods where they did thin sections so they can really look into the different parts of the woods. And so, that's kind of what you're getting here. But they are also able to look at this, and you can see the different abundances of the different trees and such. So more conifers than angiosperms, kind of what you expect. It seemingly seems to actually resemble a lot of what you see in forests in New Zealand and Tasmania, as well as some of the really high elevation forests in parts of Chile. So it seems like this kind of environment actually might have been pretty widespread across the southern continents. And then as, Antarctica iced over more, it only survives in a few places now, but we can still have a really good modern comparison to it. Make sure I'm looking at the right one, right? Yeah. So this one's about Paleomyelia indica, which is a new Meliolaceae fungus. These largely grow on living trees, and it seems like this one was similar. You can see some of the different structures. These are the little what are they called? And suddenly I'm having a brain fart. But essentially they have these tubes that they're able to go and collect nutrients from. That's essentially what you're looking at. Cat, where are you going? So what you're able to do with this one, though, that's really important is the modern ones don't have sexes. It's essentially all asexual as a species. This one has preserved some asexual traits and some sexual traits for reproduction. So it's essentially just showing us, hey, when did this trait start to evolve? And this would have been in the late Miocene, so about 12 to 8 million years ago. So seemingly a fairly recent change in this lineage, but really neat to see that we can see, how these spores are starting to be produced in different ways for this fungus. Okay. Oh, this one's fun. So this is Trapa, which is a genus of water plants that most of you probably know better as water chestnuts. But the reason they're called Trapa is because they look like caltrops. You don't want to step on one, that would hurt. Cat, please stop rubbing the microphone. I love you. You're a wonderful cat. Yeah, you're a very loud cat. Don't worry, this cat loves me. I know she's loud and it sounds like she's unhappy. She'll be fine. Anyway, so this one was looking at some fossil ones that were relatively recent, but really importantly, what they were doing is trying to take photos of many of them from different positions so they could make this 3D reconstruction. Full size or high res? There we go. So we can get this really high resolution image of it and essentially what it would have looked like in life. So this is a modern day one, but this is how they're reconstructing it for the fossil. This is really useful because we've shown plenty of plants in this, but most of them are squished flat. If we can start using these kinds of techniques to really start producing 3D images of what these plants would have looked like, that'll be really nice for understanding plant evolution, which oftentimes is kind of a pain in the butt. So yeah, really useful for plant evolution. Okay, let me check. Hi cat again. Like goat heads. Kind of like goat heads, but not necessarily trying to spread seeds that way, to my understanding. Just since they're more aquatic, probably more of a anti-grazing predation thing, I would guess. But I am not an expert on water chestnuts. This one is also really interesting. So this is looking at mammals, and essentially their humerus, so this upper arm bone up here. And what they're saying is, well, yeah, sure, you have deer that live in the forest, and you have deer that live in the plains. Are they built the same? And you also have predators that live in the forests, and predators that live in the plains. Are they built the same? And no, they're not. However, if you're looking at the humerus of the animals that are living in the forest, or that are living in the plains, as long as they're in the same environment, they do correlate more. So essentially, when you have an animal that's trying to live in a forest more, you're going to have a more particular type of humerus, whereas if you're more of a plains animal, you're going to have a different shape to that as well. Really cool to find that there's this convergent evolution in the humerus shape between both ungulates and herbivores and, your carnivore groups. Really cool to see. Makes sense, because they're trying to do the same thing, run through the same environment, not trip on the same trees or go for holes or whatever. So it makes sense, but it's very interesting to see that where there's this widespread convergent evolution for these different environments. Also, that means if you find just a fossil humerus and you plug it into this matrix, you could very easily go, hey, look, we have now good evidence that this is a forested environment based on the shape of this humerus. Really cool to see that we can start potentially doing some more paleo reconstructions that way. Okay, that is that one. That's the one I need to open now. Okay. So this one's a bit more of like a theory paper, because there's this idea that extinction is really on like a 2 million year cycle, where a species only exists for maybe 2, maybe to 5 million years. What that means is the longer a lineage exists, the more likely it is to go extinct, is essentially the idea. And they looked at a bunch of mammals and went, yeah, that's not the case. There's no real correlation to that. This kind of idea that's been given, and it's largely a lot of plots kind of like this, where they're doing the math to show it. It's essentially just going, hey, let's cool it on the a species lasts this long talk, or a lineage lasts this long talk, because obviously something has to keep surviving or else everything would be extinct in 2 to 5 million years. Doesn't make sense just on the face of it. And now we're starting to find more math to be able to really show that. There's not really a correlation between how long some of these groups, for example, in this one, it's looking at Artiodactyla, that's the two-toed ungulates. And you can see, like, yeah, sure, there's some changes here. But really importantly, like, yeah, there's still taxa surviving, and it's not like it's just being a constant line. Like, this is what you would kind of expect. Sorry, I'm trying to find, there's some better graphs in here somewhere, I think. Regardless, but that makes sense, right? And some of that's going to be preservation biases. And sure, some of those lineages will go extinct, but there's not a correlation between how long the lineage was around and when it went extinct is the important part. So essentially, if you're looking at your Artiodactyl with all those, giraffes evolved more than 2 million years ago, they're still around. But also some of the other Artiodactyls evolved more than 2 million years ago, and they are extinct. But there's no correlation there throughout all of these different groups. So, yeah. This one's like all theory. Oh, this one's fun, though. Because this one is still in mammals, but this is on function of the upper limbs. And essentially, hey, a lot of mammals move to the water, right? What does that do to their limb morphology, and how diverse does it make their limb morphology? What it's showing is mammals that live on land are pretty basic as far as the way their limbs are shaped. Whereas actually, if you move to the water, because there's so many more things to try and do, you get a lot more variation. This basically, when you move to the water, you can change your arms more than you can by staying on land, is essentially the basic summary of it. Which is not necessarily what people would have expected, because animals are running across all kinds of different land. Those are also the ones we see all the time that look different. Yeah, sure, but you need to think about when you're in the water. If you're something like a seal or a sea lion, you also need to move around on land. So you're going to have a different arm morphology than a whale that stays in there all the time. If you're a smaller marine animal, you're going to be doing something still different. If you're an otter, you're still going to have different kinds of arms. So it's this really great way to show, the kind of diversity that you have in just upper limb morphology in different mammals. And how, again, like I was saying, the mammals that existed with the, that went into the water have a lot more diversity in their overall shape. Okay. Not seeing anything come through on the comments. Hopefully y'all are still hearing me. I'm just going to keep going because I'm at least recording so I can upload this later if people want the rest of it. So this is also looking at something that went back to the water, but it's a crocodilian. So this is Pelagosaurus, which is one of these marine crocodilians that went all the way to the water. Okay, someone in the chat real quick is asking about jaguars and tigers being in the water. Will they evolve into sea lion bodies in a few million years? It depends on the environmental pressures, right? Like they're doing great at what they're doing right now, which is hunting in and around waterways. But if there's a pressure that causes them to need to catch more fish to survive, yeah, probably. I mean, it really all comes down to things like that. If there's more deer around too, they're not going to need to be in the water as much. So it varies a lot. So here you go. Yep. So yeah, Pelagosaurus again, right here, you can see they're looking at the various parts of it. These are the osteoderms that would have ran along the back. So the little pieces of bone growing inside of the skin, not directly attached to the skeleton. This one was also looking at a lot of the different kind of physiology, and based on what they found, here we go. Based on what they found here using thin sections, they were trying to see if it would have had, like a lot of marine animals, a more elevated metabolism, which would mean closer to warm-blooded or ectothermic. Whereas it could have also been more reptilian endothermic, so lower metabolism. There's also some things like monitors, which are reptiles, but can elevate they kind of float in between cold and warm-bloodedness. So what they found is it actually would have been closer to a crocodilian type metabolism, meaning it wasn't likely, swimming rapidly after prey. Instead, it was much more likely a sit and wait predator, kind of sitting where it was, waiting for a fish to come by, and then snapping at it and eating it that way, as opposed to being a more active predator like you might see in certain monitor lizards, which do elevate their metabolism when they are actively hunting. Okay. Yeah. Here we go. So these are the osteoglossids. The osteoglossids are this group of bony fish that are most exemplified by things like this, right? Or the Arapaima, which is this really big fish that's famously been in all kinds of documentaries because it's big and hard to catch. But they're pretty widespread. And by pretty widespread, I mean they live throughout the equatorial regions. So in South America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia and Northern Australia. What's really interesting about this, though, is they didn't evolve until after the breakup of Pangaea, so they weren't just around the equator and hung out there. Instead, what it seems like happened is a lot of them spread out into the oceans, and then different evolutionary pressures pushed all of these lineages into fresh water during the Cretaceous, most likely, and then a little bit into the Paleogene. But what that essentially means is, yeah, they were marine fish, and now just none of them are, which is really odd because we don't have any of these in the oceans anymore, but we have them in fresh water across the entire globe. So really strange that they're all interacting with what are probably very similar environmental pressures, but it makes sense. There's your phylogeny of them, so you can see that the marine ones are not or the modern ones are a little more spread out. But yeah, just really interesting to see that they're dealing with a lot of these different kind of pressures, and it's showing how they likely moved from one of these places to the others. And some of these, there's not any in North America right now, but there's fossils there. So some of these are accounting for extinct taxa as well. So yeah, really cool to see that they're going out throughout the oceans and then like, how about we don't do the oceans? All right, so this is from Lebanon, and so it's this dragonfly that is in marine sediments. Libanoaceae Michaeli. Sorry, you can clearly tell that in the edited videos I probably struggle with this too, but we cut those ones out. This is a really famous Lagerstadt in Lebanon. And so it's the first one of these dragonflies from the Aeschynidae, which is this group of the darners, right? It's this really big, widespread group of dragonflies. There's 450 species today. But this is the first time we actually know of one from the Cretaceous. The rest of them have been from the Eocene and onwards. So it's a great look into like their early evolution to be able to really kind of understand where they're coming from. And again, the fossils aren't super great. A lot of times dragonflies are just preserved like this, but the scale patterns on them are really useful for identifying them. So good to see again. Okay, now we have Cretaceous amber inclusions and tardigrades. So this is from Canadian amber, actually. And what they did is they used the technique called confocal fluorescence, because this is kind of the imagery that they had before. And what you do is you take a teeny tiny pinhole, focus it on one part of the fossil really well, and then you add all those up and you get what are really nice photos of these fossils. You can actually see the detail. It's incredible what happens when you use new techniques. Anyway, but for tardigrades, there's two different clades of tardigrades, and these are largely based on the claws that you can see on some of these here. We get down to the phylogeny. Here we go. So there's these two groups here that they seem to be from. Bornelegae is one of the ones that was already known. Areobus dactylus is a new one. And then Paradorphio Paradoriforibius chronocarabius is the another one that was known from this site, but just now we're able to start placing it a little closer to some of these other groups. So yeah, we're able to start identifying more things with some of these tardigrades, which, you know, they're tiny, they don't normally fossilize well. So it's really cool to see some of that and be able to actually show how good this technique is for identifying different structures in vague amber fossils. So really useful. I expect to see this used a lot more in various other amber studies as well. Just checking comments again, or the whatchamaface again. Chat. That's what I'm checking out. Cocosiae are like these is a group of palm trees, and so here's some fossils of them. Right, this is cool. There's the drawn up schematic of it. They're palms, right, and you can see that pretty clearly. What's really important about these ones is where they show up in India, because what you have in India during the very latest Cretaceous and a little bit into the Paleocene is these massive volcanic trap systems. And so trap comes from Trapa, which is Swedish for stairs, because you get these various layers of big lava and it erodes into kind of stair type shapes. In between those big lava flows, though, you do get normal deposition. So you'll have big lava flow, sand, big lava flow, mud. In one of those intertrappean beds, we're finding these fossils, which means there were massive volcanoes erupting. And then, you know, after they stopped, just a little bit after they stopped, some palm trees just decided, like, yeah, we can grow here. Really cool to see. So yeah, that's a really nice one to be able to show kind of how the intertrappean beds were not quite as devastated as you might expect. And on that subject, intertrappean beds, look, come on, there we go. Sorry, it's expecting it to load a little faster. This was looking at intertrappean beds as well. Again, also from India. So here's your various flows that are being shown here, and then this the intertrappean bed. That's the normal mud and sand. They looked at this and were able to find micrometeorites, which means essentially something large hit the planet and little pieces of it went flying throughout the atmosphere, and some of them settled down here. I wonder what that could be at the end of the Cretaceous. It's probably from what knocked off the dinosaurs or associated stuff, because there are some people arguing for multiple impacts. But anyway, it's just really cool to be able to say and be able to very clearly show that, yeah, there was an impact that was pretty significant in between some of these time periods of the eruptions. I don't know if there's no more figures, but still really cool to see. Scroll back up to the top so people can see the title of that one as I pull up the next one in case they want to go find the paper themselves as well. There's still been a lot of debate about the end of the Cretaceous and the impact specifically, though, with some people blaming climate specifically from the decant traps with all of the outgassing CO2 and such released from those volcanoes, potentially being the cause of this, right? Potentially being the cause of the extinction. This one is saying at least in the part of the late Cretaceous within this very specific basin, not globally, this specific basin, climate change probably contributed to that extinction. And so again, you're looking at 68 to 66.2 million years ago in this basin, and there was more rainfall that they were able to detect within this basin using various isotopes and whatnot. And what that suggests is essentially that, yeah, they were probably using this as a nesting site, because there's good evidence that dinosaurs were nesting a lot around river systems and stuff, kind of like modern day crocodilians do. And then because there was more rainfall, the discharge from that river got more variable and essentially flooded them out of using that as nesting grounds. And so essentially these dinosaurs just didn't really have a use for that environment anymore, so didn't stay there. So at least locally they may have gone extinct because they either A, migrated somewhere else, or B, they did just go extinct there because all of their eggs got flooded out year after year. So yeah, really, really neat paper, really neat concept. I'm not entirely opposed to it. There could have been some other causes, but you know, it makes enough sense. Glad you're live. I love the channel. Thank you for the loving of the channel. And we are going to be jumping over here on the subject of the impact. There's ruthenium, which is a rare earth metal, I believe it is, and they were able to measure it and go, hey, look, we have enough of it to say what kind of impactor the Chicxulub meteor was. And they suggest it to be a carbonaceous type asteroid, and that's just because of the makeup of it. I was incorrect looking at my notes now. Ruthenium is actually a platinum group metal, and it's fairly rare in the atmosphere, but the isotopes of it are able to help show that, yeah, it falls along with, there we go, carbonaceous chondrite. You're falling down here with the ruthenium, right? As opposed to some of the more neutral and other sampled stuff. Here's your ruthenium being very well within the carbonaceous chondritic meteor category. So seemingly that's very much what we were impacted by that killed off the dinosaurs, or at least the non-bird dinosaurs. Don't believe there's any other figures. Yeah. So yeah, that's just kind of what you're running into, right? It's, hey, look, big impact came in, boom, they died. Cool. Now we're going to jump to the green sands of the UK. Specifically microvertebrates. So microvertebrates are just, you know, the teeny fossils that some vertebrates leave. This one is interesting because it's looking at them from the green sands, which would have been a marine deposit that is now in England. And what they find is various sharks, various sharks, various sharks, various sharks, a few scales from not sharks but bony fish, a few invertebrates, a few crocodilians, and a few vertebra from other fish. What you're not finding here, other than the crocodilians, are large marine reptiles. So no plesiosaurs, no ichthyosaurs, no mosasaurs. So kind of not what you'd expect as far as a full ecosystem. It seems like this may have been a kind of more isolated area where a lot of those larger predators couldn't quite access, and so potentially serving as a refuge for a lot of these various organisms. And you see this here, the green sands. The reason it's called the green sands is because it is green. I know, crazy. Sometimes geology is very straightforward. Green, again. But yeah, really interesting to see that there's not many of these other larger predator groups that you might expect. And hopefully there will be some more work done on that as far as climate and whatnot, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff here that you could hopefully find, but we just haven't, and people haven't really explored it as well as, at least as well as I would have liked. Okay. Okay, and then we have the Burrow group from the late Cretaceous of South America. This one is talking about Epoidasuchus tavaraceae, which is this new species of periosaurid. What's really interesting is this is largely in the Sebekians, which is this group of crocodilians that are very closely related to modern crocs but moved entirely onto land. However, seemingly at least some of them actually moved back into the water. And so this is just one more to really help start identifying some of these traits that we can really use to say, hey, look, some of them are moving back into the water and some of them are staying on land more. And there's a number of these groups that did a lot of different things. I could spend an hour going in, maybe not an hour, I could spend at least a solid 10 to 15 minutes going into various weird things that some of these crocs were doing. But really interesting to see. Again, South America, Brazil, that's where these are being found. And yeah, the skull's not as complete as you might want, but it's complete enough to go, yeah, this one is probably being closer to the semi-aquatic Pepasuchines as opposed to the Periosaurines, although both of those belong to the Periosaurids. It's just kind of how you make clades smaller and smaller is just the suffix on them, essentially. Okay, still looking at the chat, not seeing anything pop up. So we're just going to keep it going. These are also from South America. This is a juvenile Areopasuchus. And what's really nice about this is a lot of these more land-dwelling crocs, we don't have a lot of good young ones for. And so what this means is, hey, look, we finally have a few good ones that we can use to start identifying different characteristics of for future work. Because there's a lot of, oh, hey, look, we found a whole bunch of these. Some of them are really small, some of them are really big. Well, how do you know the small ones aren't just the babies of the big ones? Now we can hopefully start to do that because we're starting to get some of these young ones where we can start identifying some of these various characteristics in them to really understand kind of how they were developing as a group. Why did they move on to land, I wonder? Food? I mean, for why a lot of these crocs moved on to land, it is going to be just what they were able to eat. Dinosaurs did not have a monopoly on ecosystems. There's still a lot of variation, and especially for small to medium-sized animals in the Cretaceous, that seems to be the case, especially after the extinction of a lot of the Carcharodontosaurs. It seems like there would tend to be one or two fairly large theropods in an environment, which means those smaller niches open up quite a bit. And at least throughout the Mesozoic, most of these land-based crocs weren't massive. They were 10 to 15 feet long, so maybe 3 to 5 meters, which is still a pretty big animal, but it's not quite what we see later on, because some of these did survive the KPG impact, and they reached lengths of over 20 feet, so over 6 meters, being absolutely massive giants, as large as the largest crocodilians today, but able to run around on land. So it's just a different kind of so it's just they were able to occupy that smaller niche, and then once the dinosaurs died out, or the non-bird dinosaurs died out, they were able to expand their body sizes and start doing even more. I mean, that really is basically it. As for Areopasuchus, there's Areopasuchus. Where is it? There, Manzanensis. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Which is a new species of them. There's already a few well-known species of Areopasuchus. This one is durophagus, though, so it had more blunted teeth for crushing into shells or other hard prey. This is really interesting because it's actually from the same locality as another Areopasuchus species, Areopasuchus buitrerainus. I swear I can do this. Buitrerainus. Which is just had more pointy teeth, was probably eating more fish and kinds of things, and eating softer bodied prey. So we're seeing this kind of niche partitioning already developing in these groups. Which again, this is one that's closer to being on land as opposed to being closer to crocodilians, modern day crocodilians. So you're starting to see a lot more of that kind of variation in what exactly they were doing, how they were feeding, and what kind of ecospace they were taking up. And being able to be niche partitioning like that, is just really solid evidence that, yeah, they were able to evolve and diversify well, and they weren't necessarily limited by being just crocodilians in a dinosaur's world. This one's all essentially finite element analysis for the large part of it. So, hey, look, we're looking at where the stresses are in these various things. As tyrannosaurs got bigger and could bite harder, that means their skulls had to deal with more stress, because they have to be able to withstand just because they're biting through bones, that's great, but also if their bone crushes because of that force, that's not great. That's essentially what this paper is looking at. And you can see some of this variation in tyrannosaurines as they got larger. And so this paper basically comes out and says, yeah, we don't agree with the puncture and pull hypothesis, which is if you have, your dead body here, this is the dead body, you puncture, you grab onto it, and you pull straight back. They're suggesting that tyrannosaurs probably had a slightly different feeding mechanism or method. From what I am finding, and from somebody I know who was presenting at Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, they had different numbers for it, but they also used slightly different methods of calculating this. So I'm expecting there to be a lot of debate about this, but I kind of like their idea better, which is saying a lot because Emily Rayfield is like one of the most brilliant paleontologists for this kind of thing there is. But I think it just comes down to the fundamental tool that was being used, which is a lot of this finite element analysis stuff is built for engineering, not for biology. And so the other person I know is using finite element analysis software built for biology. So I think as we start refining those, I think as we start refining a lot of those tools, I think we'll find the puncture pole hypothesis is still pretty valid. Let me just real quick check. Okay, drop that. Cool. Sorry, my wife was letting me know that she was posting about being live on various social medias. So I appreciate her. She's the best. Okay. So yeah, expect a lot of debate about tyrannosaurs and feeding behavior in the next few months to few years. Okay, now we have endocranial development in non-avian dinosaurs. And so what this is basically saying is we looked at how the brains were built in these various animals, and this includes dinosaurs and modern birds. And it's not... The issue is you have non-bird dinosaur brains are built a lot more like crocodilian. So here we go. Here's the alligator brain. So you know you have your big olfactory bulbs up here, et cetera, et cetera. And then Psittacosaurus, you can really see how that develops here as well. But again, short in the young ones. Overall, what they're suggesting is, yeah, what this probably means is that bird brains, Gallus is the chicken, bird brains essentially just took the young dinosaur brain and expanded that development into adulthood, which is totally unique among the dinosaurs. So they had this really distinct way of developing their brains into something that they could use for flight when you think about a bird head, especially where the beak is very long, but the skull part of it is very small and rounded. It makes sense that that is a good adaptation for them to have so they can fit their brain into their skull. View an article. There we go. And so you can really see where this is. Like Archaeopteryx is still falling out more close to the non-avian dinosaurs, whereas as you start getting up here, you start getting into more of the birds. And then your more alligatorine ones here, Tyrannosaurus rex, again, olfactory bulbs. So you're able to really kind of see how this kind of young dinosaur brain shape was adopted into the and developed into the bird brain down the line as they continue to grow. On the subject of non-avian theropods, though, we're at Caledodracocaudari, which is a Forellosaurian abelosaur. Forellosaurians are a group of these large abelosaurs, really tiny arms. The most famous of which is... The most famous of which is Carnotaurus. It was even in Jurassic Park. It was even in Dinosaur by Disney. So yeah, this is what this is. What's important about this one is all of those other ones are largely from South America. This one's from France, which is famously not in South America. And don't go in the comments to pop off about French Guiana. It's not from French Guiana. It is from France proper, in Normandy even. So it's really interesting to find this here because it's so distinct from essentially where we know these from. It's also a bit earlier than the other ones. This one's coming from the early Cretaceous. So what that means is probably they evolved in Europe or Northern Africa and then were able to disperse to these various areas, including South America, where they became much more successful. And this is looking at part of the pelvis. You can see it's not complete, but you are starting to get some of this really distinctive hooking near the back of it that you get in Carnotaurus, but not in Majungasaurus. as well as some of the transverse processes. So this is the tail vertebra. Essentially, they're like this so that they can hook in and make the tail more rigid. And it's not quite as dramatic here in Caledodraco, but this is, again, probably the earliest one. You're still getting this expansion, which would help stabilize that tail, or to help stabilize and anchor larger leg muscles so that it could run faster. It's a very specific trait we see in this group of abelisaurs, is having this sort of expansion to stabilize the tail and allow for more musculature for powering the leg muscles. And again, being found in France is just wild considering what we know of the group already. Oh wow, sorry, I just looked at the number of people I have in the chat. I was not expecting there to be 40 whole people here. That's really cool. Thanks, guys. As for other ones, we have I'm gonna just, because I don't remember if the reconstruction is directly in here, but I know this reconstruction is, I believe, the official one. Make that bigger. There we go. There we go. So this is Alcaracush Kyrgyz. There we go. Gosh. For whatever reason, I can say Kyrgyzstan well. I can't say Kyrgyzakis very well until I did it then. Anyway, it's from Kyrgyzstan. It's a Metriacanthosaurid, which is this group that's kind of like allosaurs, but they're a bit a separate branch. But there were two specimens found. One was an adult, or a subadult. The other was a juvenile, meaning maybe they were gregarious and like living around each other at the same times. So it could be anything from a pack to just, hey, they were both in the same area at the same time, to maybe they were feeding at a large carcass and got washed away with it in a flash flood. It's hard to say. 7 to 8 meters long, so a little bit under 30 feet, maybe around 25 feet long. Pretty large animal. This follows a trend that we see throughout a lot of Eurasia at this time, where the Metriacanthosaurs are kind of the really large predators, whereas in parts of Iberia, at least, and then in North America, you have the allosaurs being the really large predators. So really interesting to find. It tracks with what we expect from the Jurassic. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's really nice to just find more of these data points so we can start trying to do biogeography and understand, okay, where were the Metriacanthosaurs doing really well? Where were the allosaurs doing really well? And then maybe even see where the Carcharodontosaurs may have evolved out of, because there's still some debate about that. And if we can do some more biogeography, we might be able to get a little bit of a better answer to that. So glad everyone gets to see the print. Yeah, thanks, Danny. Sorry, my wife is making fun of me for not being able to say all of the names perfectly the first time. You try to say it fast enough that nobody can tell you what's wrong. I mean, that's not a bad idea, but I also want to say it properly. Fortunately, this one is easier with Europasaurus holgeri. This one's from northern Germany. Europasaurus is this relatively small sauropod that would have been in this European archipelago during the late Jurassic, because Europe was largely flooded at this point, so it was just a series of islands. This one's looking at the dentition of it, and what it found is based on the teeth in the specimen. There we go. Some of these teeth in this specimen, as well as essentially how they're found throughout various parts of the world. There's just not a figures tab. Whatever. You can see the spacing here is basically conserved, right? So here's the spacing of the teeth there. Here's teeth without the jaw associated that are just isolated, and they're all in the same position, essentially. Why did they fall out and all line up perfectly like they do in the skull? What they suggest is that sauropods had a beak, a keratinous beak, so a keratin beak, that would have helped to anchor these teeth, and then when the teeth fell out, sometimes the keratin would just come off too. Then once those would get deposited, they get covered by mud or whatever, then the keratin would erode away or decay away, but the teeth would stay in place. So that's why we're seeing some of these trends in how teeth are preserved. You can see, like right here, this is isolated. This was found without any of the rest of the skull. but they're all basically in life position. So really cool to basically say, yeah, sauropods probably had beaks, or at least some of them. So really interesting. I love to see it because this is one of those things that was presented at SVP a few years ago, and there's just individual teeth showing the surface of them. But yeah, this was presented a few years ago at SVP, and it's nice to see it finally out and published. No, I can't publish for free in PeerJ. I wish I could. My school, unfortunately, does not have a link to PeerJ. I did try that because I'm trying to work on a paper. Okay, so this is echinoids. So echinoids are the echinoderms, but echinoids more specifically are sea urchins and also sand dollars. So this is looking at a collection of them from the Middle Miocene of Taiwan, and you know, they're pretty basic fossils of these specifically they're pencil urchins because they just have these really long thin spikes. And you can see some more here and here. What's really interesting about these ones is these are the earliest known pencil urchins in Asia. There's also other echinoderms found, and so it suggests that there's multiple environments in this system, in the rocks that they come from, where there's some that are more tidally influenced and some that are only moderately tidally influenced. And it really helps to be able to, it helps for future research. And I hate to say that for a lot of these things because it's like, oh, what's the big impact? We don't know yet. But as we're thinking about echinoderms in the modern day parts of Asia where they live, this might end up being very important for understanding how they got distributed to Asia and then how they were able to spread across the rest of the coast. And for conservation stuff, that could be very important, is understanding kind of where did they start, where can they survive historically. Oh, fun. All right, so now we're on deuterostomes, which deuterostomes are animals which, when you're a zygote, you know, you're a little collection of cells, and you start to get an indent, and in some things, that becomes the mouth. In some things, like deuterostomes, that becomes the butt. We happen to be deuterostomes, so when you were forming in the womb, you had a butt first. Fun fact. This is looking at kind of what their origins would have been like, and it's basically just what would the hypothetical ancestral deuterostome look like. And it was probably living on the bottom of the ocean, probably fairly worm-like, and that could probably explain how a lot of these organisms started, because deuterostomes are largely things like the echinoderms, but also when you're looking at vertebrates and things related to us, tunicates, which tunicates, there's some fossil ones, that's fun, are like these little blobs essentially that are just filter feeding. But that kind of very basic lifestyle might be kind of ancestral for many of the deuterostomes. And so essentially, yeah, they're worm-like, they're just kind of living on bottom, and then vertebrates developed the backbone, which really helped them to achieve more as far as being able to do different kinds of lifestyles. So, yeah. And again, this one is another one of those, this is largely theory. There's not like fossils to really help support and back it up. It's just like, if we're thinking about this, how do we apply it's evolutionary thought experiments. I think that's the best way to describe it. As for some other fossils, we have there we go. We have fusulinids, which I believe they have a figure of one here somewhere. Oh, they don't. Okay, I'm gonna need to. Whoop. Oh, they did. So fusulinids are these large single cells essentially, but they're large enough that you can really like look and see them in fossils. But they show up in large numbers, and since they're all kind of just blobs, it can be really hard to identify them to different taxonomic ranks. This paper was using essentially deep learning algorithms to try and see if you could identify them from photos, especially where multiple taxa can appear in just a single block. And so what this means is now instead of going, oh, well, it might be this, it might be this, it might be this, it might be this, we can start going, oh yeah, no, we can identify these much faster with just a simple photo and the algorithm in order to start actually categorizing these better. And because of that, we can probably start to understand where these were living better and understand what kind of rocks that, what kind of environment they were found in. And then apply that to other fossils that are found in the same area. So, yep. So yeah, that's what's happening here, right? Is essentially it's just, hey, look, we can kind of use some machine learning to um, predict the different groups that are going to be present and be able to understand if they are there or aren't there based on these photos. And you can see some of the various forms of them that do show up um, from this image as well. So really useful. These are really common fossils, and they can be very useful for just geology as a whole. So being able to have this applied to the fossils for geologists as well is also really nice. Okay, and we are going back to the Cambrian. So sclerotomies are these hardened portions of not necessarily exoskeleton, but of the overall makeup of the animal that can be shed. And there are some of these in some tardigrades. Wait, am I in the wrong group? I'm on the wrong paper. Next paper is the one I'm thinking of, huh? Nope. I know there's a paper that was, I think I may have actually already talked about that in a previous month in review. So I was just on the wrong paper mentally. Anyway, so never mind what I was saying. Lophotrochozoans are things like mollusks and also the brachiopods and the bryozoans. What's happening here is they're essentially saying, okay, well, how did they harden their bodies? And so this is actually looking at Shoshana aculeata, which is this new fossil from the Cambrian that has really early mollusk traits, including the starts of a shell, but also with the color coming out on the sides, probably a foot and a mantle, which means, is there a, I think there's not, I think I need to go to something like, actually, hypothetical ancestral mollusk, the ham. The ham is the hypothetical ancestral mollusk. And so this, is there a better one somewhere? Yeah. Let's look at this. There you go. So this is basically what people think the first mollusk would have looked like. It would have had a basic shell on the back, a basic foot, the mantle containing all the internal organs and such, gills breathing, allowing it to breathe in through here, digestive tract. But that, well, I'm going faster than I thought. Thanks for letting me know, Danny. This is the basic idea though of the ham, and people do call it the ham in part because it's funny, but hypothetical ancestral mollusk. So this is basically going. This is essentially that they essentially found the fossil of that, where bone, hard sclerites on the back, big foot that it can crawl across. Because again, when you're thinking about your mollusks, it's just a foot on the bottom is what they call it, right? And so this is actually a little closer to crown mollusks, so mollusks that have all of the traits that they should have, or at least that modern ones have, than Wawachia is, which Wawachia was thought of as being pretty close to there and does seem accurate. What's this podcast called? I might be trying to release this as a podcast. Unfortunately, because it's so visual, it might be hard to. That said, I might be trying to also bring in other people to kind of co-interview or co-talk about stuff, in which case it would be easier to podcast with. So we'll see, because I see people talking about that in the chat. And you can kind of see that here, where you have these various traits that you should see in mollusks and whether or not they were present at different stages. So here with Shoshana, you would have the peripheral mantle cavity. You wouldn't have quite a shell plate, but it is starting to harden. You have a muscular foot, and you have some chetae, which are some of the structures that they use for feeding. It's the little it's a feeding structure, for lack of a better term. But really cool to find this. Like I said, it's basically just this perfect fossil that shows exactly what we expect. So really nice to find. On the subject of mollusks. Oh, do I need to... Yeah, sure, just replace it, and then I can open with Firefox. Oh, move it to where I want it to be. Okay, there we go. So this is a chitin. Chitins are basically things that retained largely that kind of body plan, but have different segments. This is just one of those segments. So it's Hypacrosaurus, which is this new one. It comes from Ireland, which is really cool because Ireland's generally fairly fossil depauperate. When I was talking earlier about the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum and the break off of Greenland towards where it is now and off of Europe, causing a lot of volcanism. A lot of that volcanism happened in Ireland. So a lot of Ireland is covered in basalt rather than nice, pretty fossil preserving sediments. But that kind of volcanism is actually what caused like Giant's Causeway, which is pretty famous to form. Again, this is just another new one. It's nice because it's helping to show some of the evolution of these various groups of chitins, such as the Paleoloricodons and the Neoloricodons, which are essentially just the older group that existed in the Paleozoic, into the newer group, the Neoloricodons, that are the group that evolved into modern day ones. So, it's nice to be able to start filling in some of these gaps, even from places that don't necessarily always have super pretty fossils. But again, it's really important for understanding the overall history of the group. So yeah, it's neat. Okay, let that load, and now we have novel pterygoid sea scorpions. So what this means is just, hey, we have totally new ones. Sea scorpions, Eurypterids are, I'll just Google one. Eurypterid. Yeah, it's lives in the sea. It has chelicerae, which are these little pincers near the mouth in order to feed. So we know it's closely related to arachnids. It has a telson that wouldn't actually be venomous like a scorpion, but closely enough, moderately closely related. So these ones are from Australia. They're fairly large, and they've been able to be assigned to two already known genera, which is Echolopterus and Pterygotus, which are both large predatory ones, right? I will show you that there here in a moment. But essentially, the fossil is this, which is one of the main parts in the centrum of the Eurypterid that helps to link essentially the large paddle arms to the body. And so, yeah, here's the fossil. You can see the fossils, because there's the two of them. This is just the Pterygotus one. This is just how they coded it for scanning electron microscopes. But again, you can see just the size of it. It's moderately large. They were able to assign it to these two groups. This is basically the first time we found really large ones of these from the southern continents. So it's really exciting to have that. Here we go, Pterygotus. It's going to be kind of like this, and it is Echolopterus. There we go. Where's the little size bit for me? There should be one where it's... There you go. There's Echolopterus. Have fun thinking of that when you're trying to get to bed. The nice thing is they only lived in water, and they've been dead for 400 million years or so. So you really don't have to worry that much. But again, this is the first time we're really finding them in the southern continents. So as we're starting to piece together kind of how and where these different groups of large Eurypterids, which were apex predators in the oceans for a long time, actually started from, very useful. So that'll be really nice. Oh, now we're doing brains. Brains, I will say, I am not as excited about, just because I'm not good at it. But you have encephalization quotients. So encephalization quotient is essentially how large is your brain to your body size. And we can track that in a lot of different animals. The gosh, I hate this mammal group because I can never say it right. Euarchontogliers are this group that is also primates, but also a lot of other things like the rabbits and their relatives, shrews, and rodents. So it's this pretty interesting group of the mammals. What this paper is finding is that there's this general trend to go, oh, well, mammals are successful now because as they got bigger, their brains just exploded in size and they all became smart. And while that might be true for us, it's not true for the rest of the mammals. Essentially, the Euarchontogliers is really unique in having that, and among those, the primates are very unique for having this really expanded brain size. And we, again, just don't see this in other mammal groups, other than maybe the carnivorans, but even that's somewhat debated and not necessarily, again, as dramatic. And you can see that here in various groups, how you have, again, primates starting to do this a whole lot, tree shrews doing that a whole lot, and then rodents doing that more than the rabbits are. Although rabbits are still doing pretty impressive at it when you consider how stupid rabbits seem sometimes, where they kind of have that no thoughts, head empty look sometimes. But again, you're just able to show like, hey, it's really unique what's happening in this group for mammals. We can't just apply, hey, all mammals got smart because we got smart. We need to kind of take it from a cladistics approach and go clade by clade to see how encephalization quotient changed. All right, and now jumping into climate-y stuff. Yay! Anoxic events. So an anoxic event means there is not oxygen. So these are periods in Earth's history when the oceans lost a whole bunch of their oxygen. This kind of happened periodically, cycling on and off throughout the Mesozoic, and especially from about 183 to 85 million years ago, rather. So 183 to about 85 million years ago. Excuse me. And this is right during the breakup of Pangaea, like from the start of the breakup to Pangaea until it was pretty well separated with all the current continents that we have today. So what this paper is suggesting is that you can see where these various, the OAE, the dark dots, are where there's these facies where, yeah, there's anoxic events, there's not a lot of oxygen. But essentially what they're showing is that this seems to have happened based on the breakup of Pangaea adding more mafic lava specifically into the environments. Because the weathering of those rocks, which would be rich in phosphorus, would then decay and break down into the water and cause a lot more life, because phosphorus is one of the main building blocks of DNA. So, cool. Big nutrient boom, bunch more life. There's all this plankton. They eventually start to consume all of the oxygen, and then suddenly there's this big dip in the oxygen levels in the water, and so there's these cycles of, hey, look, everything's going great, everything's going poorly, everything's going great, everything's going poorly. And that's largely because of the mafic lava, the basaltic lavas that were being released during the breakup of Pangaea. So, you know, it's really neat to see how the geosphere is directly interacting with the biosphere here. Again, like I said, just like you can just point at it. And then we are getting into the things that I have done specific videos on. So if you want more, you can check out my whole scale videos on these subjects. This one is really cool. This is the Franzvillian Basin, which is in the DRC, I believe it is, right? DRC? Franzvillian is Gabon. So just north. So in Gabon then. But essentially it's we have these fossils of what seems like the first multicellular life many millions of years, even over 1 billion years before the Cambrian explosion. Why? And so what it's essentially saying is this was a collision zone, right? So you start getting the subduction happening. That subduction is releasing a lot of these black smokers where there's a lot of nutrients being dropped from hydrothermal activity straight into these areas. And from that, you're able to get a bunch more weathering as well that's coming off into the water. And as you have life doing really well up here, there's a bias in that life to start sinking down to these really richly nutrient-rich waters down deeper. And so if these cells start to essentially develop more and stick together, they sink faster. So then as they sink faster, they're able to get more of these nutrients. So there's this bias towards developing multicellularity because of the very rich deep waters. Unfortunately, it's a collision zone, so eventually that all got crushed and subducted. So all of that life died. So there was multicellular life over 1 billion years before the Cambrian explosion, but none of it led to any of the life we see today, which is wild. There's this entire diversity of stuff that we just know existed and know almost nothing else about. It's wild. And now, oh gosh, I did so many papers that month. Okay. Moving on, we are at, yep. This is all Spinosaurid, how did Spinosaurs predate upon things? You have the Spinosaurines, you have the Baryonychines. Their skulls are different and their tooth shapes are different. Compared to crocodilians, they show up in different places. This is the main part of it. The Baryonychines were probably capturing small prey, using the tip of their jaw to really capture that, maybe carrying it around in the middle, and then swallowing it whole largely. Whereas in the Spinosaurines, they would have needed to likely do more processing. So you can see here, it's a larger, it's a fish, sure, but it's much larger than the small prey that the Baryonychine was capturing. Captures it at the tip where you have this big indentation here where the bottom jaw fits in. They use lasers. Sorry, I'm just laughing at the chat saying that they used lasers to hunt. However, the Spinosaurine is moving the prey to the back where there are these large teeth so that it can begin to process the prey more thoroughly and break it into pieces. This makes plenty of sense. I actually really liked this idea. I think this is wonderful. So yeah, I really like that one. I believe that is the last figure, but it basically sums up the whole thing, right? So I don't really know what else I would be able to show you. Hey, look, here's the differences. Big teeth that go all the way back and are really small. Not so much. More rounded, large teeth here. More large teeth here. Big gap. I mean, it's essentially these traits are what leads to this kind of concept for the feeding. Why don't I get to read research papers with awesome illustrations? Someone in the chat is saying, because different paleontologists and different other researchers have different levels of needing to be able to pay for scientific illustrators. Also, this one is nice because a lot of these are basically just silhouettes, so it makes it look fancier than it is. But it does a really good job of communicating the idea, which I think for scientific papers is the most important thing, is communicate your idea. You don't want when you're writing science, you don't write to be understood, you write to not be misunderstood. I think is a great way to kind of state this. This is another one of the ones that I did a whole video on, and this is the size one, where, hey, look, this is how big we thought a lot of these animals used to be. And now we think a lot of them are much smaller than we said they were. Why is this a problem? Well, you know, people are already denying science, so that is a part of it. But more importantly, we're using better methods now, and we need to start applying those more universally. Which is kind of what this paper is just talking about, right? Helicoprion is a great example. Oh, hey, really big shark, 25 feet long. We start doing some more of the math on it. We start finding some more complete fossils of it and getting some CT scans so we can really see the cartilage that would have been in the skull around these tooth whorls. And hey, its skull wouldn't have been as large as we thought, so it probably wouldn't have been as large as we thought. Pterosaurs similarly was sized down quite a bit, although it's still a weird animal, so that's hard to say. And then, of course, the Dunkleosteus got shrunk quite a bit, but again, using better methods of essentially where the orbit is to the back of the operculum, which is essentially just the head minus the nose, minus the rostrum. And it's something that lines up better. It's a method that works better for being able to understand the size of various organisms. And it has each of these as different case studies, right? The Megalodon one is actually fairly interesting because they go, actually, this thing's jumped between being much longer and much shorter. Unfortunately, you don't have a nice figure for it. Otherwise, I would pause on it more. But more recently, it actually got a little bit longer and a little bit flatter so that it could just travel longer distances through the water, is the current understanding. But yeah, really neat to see. And, you know, it's great. It's great to find all this. With that said, that is actually the last paper. So I am going to position myself a little more in the middle so I can look at all of my wonderful camera and think of all of my wonderful people in the chat and say thanks for showing up. This is one of the things we are going to be selling on our store that's launching soon. And by very soon, I mean like we basically just need to, we have most of the products we want set up. We just have a little bit more work to setting up the site to make sure everything is nice and pretty. And then we'll be sorted. With that said, everyone, thank you for showing up. I really appreciate it as I keep looking at the chat. And as always, be safe, take care, and don't go extinct. Yes, I am wrapping up. I apologize. This will be on the channel though, and we are going to continue doing this for the month in reviews because it helps to just cut down on a ton of editing time. So just stay tuned. Maybe more on Saturdays as we keep going forward, just because I have some stuff on Fridays. But hypothetically, there was a snail hand. Hypothetically, we're going to keep doing this because it helps cut down on a lot of our editing time, so we can hopefully continue to make other videos more regularly. So yeah, with all that said, be safe, take care, and keep an eye out, because again, we're going to keep doing this because I think this went relatively well. It was really nice to get it going, and yeah, be safe, take care, don't go extinct. Bye, everyone.